When we first moved to Elmhurst, we heard that two women in Elmhurst had thought about getting Jewish people together to form a congregation. There became 8 families that were interested, and that was the beginning. That was in the spring of 1959. We would have a school, and that we would have services on Friday nights in each other's homes, which is really all we had visions of at that time.
The Rabbi Finding Task Force.
Of one.
We found Hank Skirble. He agreed to help us out. He contacted Dan Isaac, Rabbi Isaac, who was a student, was doing graduate work on his PhD at the University of Chicago. So he became really what I would consider the first active rabbi.
He came into the school and helped set up, the classes and the curriculum. The school started with 20 children of the families that were in the congregation. And I was the first principal. The place that we met was really inadequate for even the 20. I was teaching first and second grade in the kitchen. And we started renting a church in Elmhurst that actually had classrooms. And then we went from there to a church in Lombard that was even bigger. And it just seemed like every year we had twice as many children.
When we joined the congregation in 1970, there were 70-member families, or 72-member families. And within 2 or 3 years of that time, we had moved into this building, and more than double. So, when you're a congregation of 100 families and you're planning for school for approximately 100 children, and you move into the facility with that idea, and the next year there's 200 children. We were never able to project because we really never knew what the growth was going to be.
I remember distinctly, my confirmation class was 20 kids. At our peak, around bar and bat mitzvah time, I think we were 24 or 25. And we were, by far, the biggest class that had ever gone through Ace Times religious school up to that point. I mean, the closest was maybe 12 or 14 before us. I think the class right before us had 8 or 9 people in the confirmation class. So, we were huge, and we created problems physically. There was no space in the synagogue big enough to hold all of us. So for years, my class met in the sanctuary because it was the only place we could all fit.
Publicity was very important. We had people who wrote articles in all the neighborhood papers. Between Rabbi Isaac and the Board of Jewish Education, they really set up the first curriculum that we followed.
We had almost like an advisor. We had somebody that was our person that we could call if we needed materials, we needed curriculum, we needed someone to come out and observe a teacher.
We moved here in '72 and joined the synagogue, and at that point the temple was being housed in Lombard in the church. And I think there was, maybe you can help me, about 50 families at that time. And we joined and became very active with the synagogue. Both my parents were active, trying to organize the Sunday school.
So then Rabbi Isaac left. We had a Rabbi J. Sangerman who had been a student rabbi. He had come from the Hebrew Union College and had done his practicum here, and then we hired him the next year. And then we had our first full-time rabbi, which was Rabbi Bruce Goldwasser. And by that time we were here in this building. We were having midweek Hebrew and the whole business.
I remember starting Hebrew in 3rd grade, and so Hebrew was about preparing for bar and bat mitzvahs. And I think my class was the class that had the dubious distinction of being the first Wednesday afternoon class. Although the nice thing for us, it was a real perk on Wednesdays because our Hebrew was taught by our rabbi at the time, Bruce Goldwasser. And So that was an adventure. He was very energetic. He was very young at the time. And he would do things like ask us to say a blessing, and then ask us to say it again, and then ask us to say it again. And then he promised if we did it one more time and did it right, that he would, I don't know, do a cartwheel. He would do a back handspring.
The Hebrew teachers, we used people from the congregation to begin with. Cy Vogler was one of the early ones. He's still doing it.
Luke Kaplan.
Yeah, Luke Kaplan, Lionel Shapiro. These were people who really were trained to do more than just read the alphabet.
The only teachers that are paid teachers are our Hebrew teachers. And I know that they used to not be paid, but it was before I came when they started to be paid.
I think we're one of the few congregations in the country, the only one in Chicago, but one of the few in the country that still run with volunteer teaching staff.
We do not pay any of our Judaica teachers. And again, when I tell my colleagues around the country, they can't believe it. They can't believe that we find people that want to do this, and that we have quality that goes on in our school.
One of our congregants went to Rabbi Goldwasser at the time, I believe, maybe it was Rabbi Singerman, and she said she was approached to be a teacher. She was probably approached by Barbara, because Barbara approached everybody about being a teacher. And she said she wasn't comfortable teaching, she didn't have enough of a background. This woman's name was Marilyn Streit. She said, but there are so many young women who are qualified, but they have preschoolers. What about me starting a nursery for the preschool children so that their parents can teach? And that was really the beginning, I think, of the success of our volunteer system.
After Lily Reyes left, I want to think that's when Rabbi Robinson came on board and Ida Goodman came on board as principal.
One of the things she brought to the school was the enhanced Hebrew program. Up until the time that she was here, Hebrew was mostly prayer book Hebrew, learned by rote. It was not a spoken Hebrew, it was not conversational, and it was certainly not as extensive as it is now. And the other thing that Jackie remembered that she brought to us was the idea of who's. We hadn't done it up until that time.
Besides the teachers, we have a strong commitment from our families, which I think you started when you started the school 42 years
Well,
ago.
the kids were our families. That was how we started out.
Well, but I think today it's not quite, we don't have the 100% participation that you probably did back then, but we have extremely high participation by parents, whether they're teaching or they are serving bagels for bagel break, or cutting up the challah and pouring the juice for the kids in the primary department. And the other thing that just amazes me is the number of high school students, after they're confirmed, that come back and volunteer their time. I think we have 9 kids from last year's confirmation class that are here every single Sunday, volunteering their time.
And they're
teaching.
busy Saturday night, I can imagine.
Oh, I'm sure they're busy Saturday night, they're involved in all kinds of things in their public school, but yet they find the time to do this.
We think it's important to bring them to Sunday school and come with them rather than just to dump them and leave, go have breakfast. So I'm here every Sunday morning, have been for the last couple of years. Kim taught first grade for 7 years. We want them to see it's important to us.
Rabbi Bob does an assembly at the beginning of the day, and I would say that 2/3 of the kids of the parents that drove that on any given Sunday come inside. They don't just drop their kids off, even if they just come in just for that assembly and then they leave. So we have very few in the primary department that are just dropped off and the parent drives on.
When we first moved here, we had not been involved in a temple before. Our children were young, they were 5 and 3, and this was our first temple involvement as grown-ups. But we just found this to be a really warm, homey, important place.
Our parents all knew each other, so there was this kind of another level of connection that went on. There were some instances in high school where, we had people over at our house and it got too late to go home, so they just slept in the house. And, usually if you're forgive me, but if you're a young female and your mother wakes up and sees two men sleeping in your house, she'd be upset. But our mom was like, okay, breakfast is ready. Because they were like family. It was like an extended family for us. And there was a lot of just kind of rolling up your sleeves and pitching in. There wasn't any sense of kind of established protocol. You just pitched in and did what you had to do to get it done.
I became the president because somebody asked me to be the president, and there needed to be a president, and I said yes. And I think that's true for many presidents of Eitz Chaim. I don't think many people say, oh, I can't end my life without having been the president of the temple. But I think many of the people who are presidents do it because it's a job that needs to be done, and they care about the temple, and so they say yes.
The other thing too that's remarkable about our congregation is our youth group and the number of young people who are so active in Nifty and Sifty.
Right.
We were always a significant force in any of the get-togethers.
So we organized a strong youth group. There was one year where we organized our own kind of pseudo-Sifty event. We decided we didn't like how Sifty was running things. So we had our very own, we called it Weekend in the Boonies, and we had over 200 people here. So we organized the event all ourselves. So we did a lot of that in reaching out. We were involved in Sifty. My sister and another one of our friends was involved in the Sifty board. And it was a big deal to take the train downtown every week for meetings or how they went, and to go to events. We had a large, for the size of the synagogue, we actually had a large gathering of kids that went to camp every year.
We were started out as the advisors of the youth group when it first started, and we took one of our first retreats up at Economwalk. There was no lodge like there is now. There was just the bayit, and it was in very, very bad condition. So a couple of years after that, it was condemned as a building. But one of the kids' foot went through the floor. There were big, fat mice running all around. We had old cots that they slept on, or else slept on the floor. It was really, and we went up there in the winter. So altogether, it was a wonderful experience.
It was a cool thing to go to Asrui. This was what you grew up for and hoped to achieve, when you became old enough. And our kids really latched onto that.
I grew up in Chicago, and I went to Asrui when it was about 2 years old or 3
It
years
wasn't
old.
called that then.
No, it was Union Institute. That's what it was called. And so now that my granddaughters are going to Asrui, we're a 3-generation Asrui family.
In the mid-1980s, Rabbi Bob and his friend Rabbi Mike Weinberg went to Russia. And going to Russia in the 1980s was not just a simple thing that you picked up and did. And they were able to get into Russia. And there was a big organization in Chicago called Chicago Action for Soviet Jewry. And I believe they were instrumental in sending them over there. It just really struck me, because sometimes, rabbis get up there and talk about, working for world peace or some big thing that, it would be nice and it would be wonderful. But here was one person that maybe we could work on and get her out of Russia. One of the things we did was we sent Hanukkah candles as a congregation. We bought all these Hanukkah candles, and we had these little envelopes. And I think it was $3 a person to send Hanukkah candles. And for $3, we sent like 2 or 3 candles in an envelope. And our thought behind sending the Hanukkah candles was that we would just totally inundate the post office where Natasha lived with Hanukkah candles, and hopefully some official, the postman or somebody would say to the mayor or whoever, what's going on? There's all these packages coming for this Natasha lady. All these people in the United States are sending something to her, candles, what's going on? And that hopefully it would filter up, and there would be eventually, from everything we were doing, enough pressure put on the government that, wait, what's going on in the United States that they want this woman out so badly? We also sent matzah at Passover, which was bigger, and the Wheaton post office, I was in charge of the matzah. And so after people addressed it and wrapped it in brown paper, I took it to the post office. And the Wheaton post office was the most helpful in sending the matzah. A lot of the other post offices, well, what are you doing? Why are you doing this? What is in here? Wheaton was wonderful to me. Once I told them what I was doing, they would open up, whenever they saw me coming, they'd open a new window and they would just put it right through. They were great. They didn't ask me a bunch of questions. The other thing that we did was, and this was kind of one of the things that Chicago Social Action for Soviet Jewry recommended. If you were having a bar or bat mitzvah, they would give you the name of a child in Russia. And all the kids being bar or bat mitzvah at the time would get up and say that I'm also having this bar mitzvah with, and they would give the Russian child's name, who lives in the Soviet Union and is not allowed to practice their Judaism, or celebrate their own bar mitzvah. That was one of the things that our family did. And then on the table, we had these airmail letters that you get at the post office. It's just a real thin sheet of paper. And we asked every family at Ben's bar mitzvah if they would please write a letter to the Russian government in behalf of Natasha. So, and families all across Chicago, I guess really all across the United States were doing this, but ours were aimed at getting Natasha out. There was a big Soviet Jewry rally in Washington in December, I think 87, I'm not sure. And people from our congregation went, they had Free Natasha hats on, and they met the people from New Jersey who were also working to free Natasha. We had a billboard, remember, on Roosevelt Road in big letters.
On Roosevelt or Highland?
It was on Roosevelt.
On Roosevelt, right.
Kind of west of here. Big billboard, and in huge letters it said, Free Natasha. And that's all it had on it except for the temple phone number. And poor Connie Mechanic was, the secretary at the time, and she said, it was just, that's all she did for years and years was work on freeing Natasha. It just, between phone calls and coordinating things and all of this. The Purim Carnival's going on today. Rabbi Bob got the phone call on Purim. And the Purim Carnival was going on, and it's like crazy in there, right? He came in, I don't know how he even quieted everyone down. I think he just held his hands up and got everyone quiet. And when it was perfectly silent, he said, I just got the phone call. The Soviet government is letting Natasha go. And it was just so incredible that it happened, and that it happened on Purim. And then later she came and visited the congregation once she got out. And she talked.
We have the ark that the synagogue was not our original. It did not come originally from us. We didn't have it made. It came to us from another synagogue. There was a synagogue in Chicago, in the Logan Square neighborhood of Chicago, on the northwest side of Chicago. And that synagogue, because of the changing nature of the neighborhood, was closing down. There were no longer Jewish people living in the neighborhood. Two of the Torahs, I believe, came with the ark. Our member, Norm Silverstein, his parents belonged to that synagogue there, and they arranged for the gift of the Torah scrolls and of the ark. Now there's this other Torah scroll.
The first Torah
scroll. The very first Torah scroll, the one here with the blue cover. Our receipt of this came through the good work of Hans Gutenstein, who I believe met a rabbi.
Yes, he was having dinner, I think, at the bagel restaurant.
And they got to talking, and Hans was able to tell this rabbi the story of this new congregation in the far western suburbs, and this rabbi had a Torah that needed a home. As a result of this conversation, that Torah came here, and it's the Torah that we read from every Friday night and every Saturday morning. One of our really wonderful and beloved members of the congregation, Bernie Joseph, made many beautiful things that we have here that adorn the synagogue, and particularly these objects that adorn the Torah scrolls. So he made crowns and breastplates and pointers. So this crown, as you can see, has leaves and the bells. And to go with it is the breastplate that depicts the binding of Isaac. We have Abraham and Isaac, and over here in the corner is a ram caught by its horns in the bush. Here is a pointer, and the pointer, the yard, also has a branch, and Bernie made all these things.
Our services have always been full of music. The music has changed over the years, but we've always had lots and lots of music, and we've always had lots and lots of participation from people in the congregations.
As we said at the beginning, we've come a long way, baby. Yeah, we have.